It's a rainy night in New Orleans, where the streets glisten like they're hiding secrets. And for some, those secrets are hard to face. Justice Elijah Morrow sits on a bench, an elderly man now, once a towering figure in the fight for civil rights. But tonight, he's just another face shrouded in shadows, waiting for a storm he never expected and certainly didn't deserve. You might not know this before his name echoed through courtrooms and across news headlines. Elijah was just a kid from the neighborhood trusting the system to protect him, not realizing that the very system meant to uphold justice could turn into a predator. People said he was too idealistic, too naive to think change was possible. Deep down, he feared he'd never be more than forgotten ink on a dusty page. But those early years forged a fire in him, a relentless determination that despite the scars of systemic racism and overwhelming odds, justice could be claimed and fought for. And yet, as he looks at the looming darkness outside, you can sense that familiar tension. How does a man once revered confront his own vulnerability when the system he helped shape suddenly feels hostile? This is the core of Elijah's story, a tale of confrontation, resilience, and the slow burn of truth in a world that's often turned its back on it. Join me as we delve deeper into how one man against all odds rises to reclaim his voice in the face of injustice. The rain fell heavier now, each drop a reminder of the storm brewing within me. I could still feel the sting of Declan's fist against my cheek, the surge of humiliation mingled with disbelief. I never thought I'd find myself here, a man who had once fought for the very rights I was now being stripped of, mocked and belittled, on a cold, unforgiving floor of that holding cell. "What's the matter, old man? Thought you were some kind of civil rights hero." Declan sneered, his voice dripping with sarcasm. What could a washed-up judge possibly do against a badge? Each word landed like a blow, urging the old pain surfaces and igniting a new fire. I was not the man people laughed at. I had brought change, championed those who had no voice. And yet here I sat disrespected and reduced to nothing. In that moment, a vision of my past crashed into the present, the protests, the determination in the faces of those I fought alongside. Justice doesn't sleep, it waits. I whispered these words aloud, steadying my breath, channeling every ounce of my resolve, refusing to succumb to this humiliation. They thought I was just another victim, but they had no idea who they were dealing with. Sitting on that cold bench, I could hear the whispers of disbelief, the snickers of officers reveling in their authority. I felt their disdain. It festered like a wound, but that only fueled my anger. I wouldn't be forgotten. I wouldn't be silenced. And when I finally made that call to Chief Justice Valeria Ortiz, oh, they would see. The phone rang in the silence, each tone echoing the urgency of the moment. The world shifted, and suddenly I felt a surge of power radiate through me. I was reclaiming my voice, my life, and they would pay for underestimating me. They were about to learn that justice is a force of nature, and it would rain down on them when they least expected it. You know there's a strange comfort in the rain when everything else is going wrong. But for Elijah, sitting in that damp cell, it wasn't the gentle pitter-patter that was soothing, it was more like a relentless pounding, a reminder of every drop of doubt that was soaking into his spirit. Justice doesn't sleep. It waits, he thought, trying to drown out the chaos of the precinct buzzing around him. But waiting felt like an eternity, especially when you're waiting for a system that seems hell-bent on your silence. He could hear the officers laughing in the hallway, their jokes cutting through the air like knives. Why's the old man so quiet? We're not here to hurt him, they'd say, dripping with sarcasm. And oh, how easy it was for them to laugh when they had the power. Then there was Sergeant Budrow shifting uneasily, a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes, as Declan's ego loomed like a storm cloud above them. You could practically hear the gears turning in her head, a battle of loyalty versus morality. It was like watching a soap opera where you just knew one character would make the right choice, but only after a dramatic pause. Elijah's phone call to Chief Justice Ortiz wasn't just a call for help. It was a Hail Mary in a game that felt rigged. As he placed that call, you could almost sense Declan's panic rising, like a college kid who just found out the big exam was today and he hadn't studied a thing. The fragile air of authority that had held him aloft was cracking under pressure, and Elijah could almost taste the change coming. But he didn't stand there alone. No, as the rain continued to pour, so did his determination. Each drop felt like fuel, pushing him to rise from the ashes of doubt. Because behind every setback, Elijah knew there was a story waiting to be retold. And sometimes all it took was the courage to let the storm roll in. The damp weight of despair clung to Elijah as he sat alone, shadows creeping into his mind like the storm outside. The clang of metal bars echoed around him, a reminder that the world he fought to change still held power over his body. But then, in the stillness of his cell, a flicker of clarity pierced through the haze. He'd spent decades fighting for justice, fighting for others. But here he was handcuffed and stripped of his dignity. But was he really broken? Elijah thought of the countless voices that came before him, grandmothers telling stories, warriors who marched people who stood firm in the fires of injustice. And suddenly he understood this was not the end, this was the spark. A quiet realization ignited. In that moment of vulnerability came the phone call. His fingers trembled as he dialed Chief Justice Valeria Ortiz, the very symbol of power that could thwart the corrupt tide. Justice doesn't sleep, it waits, he murmured, his voice steady, as if he were breathing life into a dormant force. Silence settled as he spoke, the air crackling with tension. With every word he felt the chains of despair loosening and uprising within him. Each sentence delivered a blow against the walls that sought to cage him. Outside the station, Declan's world began to unravel. Panic raced through him as Elijah's testimony spread like wildfire. And then it happened. Federal agents stormed in guardians of justice he hadn't anticipated. Their arrival was thunderous, the tide shifting violently. Raina Budrow, witnessing the chaos, felt a surge of courage. She turned, standing tall against the man who had bullied them both. Enough, she declared, a voice cutting through the din, a line drawn in the ground. Elijah looked up, heart-pounding strength surging through him. In that moment, he transformed from victim to warrior. The system that sought to beat him down had awakened something untouchable, something immense. This was the turning point. An unstoppable force ignited, fueled by resilience and truth. A flicker became a flame, and Elijah Marrow, amidst the rain, the storm and the struggle, rose to face the darkness head on. Elijah stepped into the courtroom, the air thick with anticipation. Rows of faces turned towards him, a mixture of curiosity and respect filling the space. As the judge called the session to order, Elijah felt a steadying presence wash over him. This was not just a fight for himself, but for every voice that had been silenced. Across the room, Declan sat rigid, sweat beading on his brow, guilt etched in the lines of his face. A stark contrast to Elijah's composed demeanour, weighing the ramifications of his actions. The jury listened intently as evidence unfolded, revealing not just what had happened that night, but the systemic failures that allowed it to occur. Each testimony felt like a hard-earned truth surfacing powerful and undeterred. As the final arguments echoed, Elijah stood tall, his voice steady yet humble. Justice isn't a trophy to be won. It's the right of every human being. The room hung on his every word, a palpable shift in the energy as he articulated the voiceless struggles of countless others. His gaze swept across the jury, and for a moment he saw their resolve hardening. He knew they felt it too, the call for real change. When the verdict was finally announced guilty, his heart soared against the backdrop of cautious optimism. The news rippled through the courtroom, and a quiet smirk spread across Elijah's lips. In that instant, he wasn't reveling in triumph. He felt a profound sense of duty fulfilled. This victory was not the end, but a step toward a long road of healing. As he exited the courtroom, Elijah was greeted by Raina, her eyes shining with newfound courage. They shared a quiet handshake, a moment of solidarity that spoke volumes. Elijah's success didn't erase the scars of pain, but it made each one feel worth it, a testament that justice in all its complicated layers was still worth fighting for. He stepped outside into the light rain, the world bursting with life around him, knowing that true justice had been served. As the rain subsides and the sun begins its slow rise over New Orleans, we find Elijah Morrow seated once more on his beloved bench, a place he once thought might serve as a stage for his final confrontations. His journey through both suffering and triumph has rewritten the narrative of justice in a world where power often speaks louder than truth. Where once he stood alone, bruised and bloodied, he now occupies a space surrounded by a community awakened to the enduring call for change. Elijah has learned that justice is not a monolithic force, but rather a living, breathing entity, one that requires vigilance and even sacrifice. His confrontation with Officer Declan Callahan reminded him that trust once broken takes time to mend, and that while the weight of power can corrupt, accountability can just as profoundly heal. Was revenge ever the goal, or was it merely a necessary catalyst for a deeper reckoning? It's a question that haunts many, does true justice come from the punishment of the wrongdoer, or can it emerge from forgiveness and reform? As the vibrant sounds of community life swirl around him, Elijah reflects on the implications of his journey. In a world where grievances often kindle flames of vengeance, one must ask, is justice the sword that strikes back, or is it the hand that extends peace? What do you believe? Can revenge ever equate to true justice? Or is it merely a fleeting shadow that obscures the path to healing? Share your thoughts below, and let's dive into this conversation that shapes our understanding of justice and humanity.